Anybody wants to know.
Assembling everybody. All right, so on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I'd like to welcome everybody here today. My name is Dennis Speed, and we're here on April 23rd for our dialogue with Lyndon LaRouche. Some of you may have heard the, I don't know what you call it, but the announcement that Barack Obama is in Great Britain. They were saying, actually on the news, that he was there on the occasion of the death of William Shakespeare. I don't know whether he came as Richard III or what he did, but in any case, we're not going to be observing the death of Shakespeare. We intend to try to do what Shakespeare did, which is to cause a lot of problems for the enemies of mankind, especially as expressed by the British Empire itself. Anyway, I'd like to first of all ask Lynn if you have anything to say on this occasion to open us up, and then otherwise we'll go right to questions.
I think we should probably get pretty quick toward questions because I want to know what you're going to ask me to do.
All right. Okay, let's go.
Okay. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. This is Jessica from Brooklyn. And a lot has happened this week. If everyone in here or anyone in here was on the call Thursday night, we know that there's some exciting things going on. Our president is over there cavorting around with the Queen, and we have the families of the 9/11 victims being very upset over Obama going to Saudi Arabia. And I don't know, it just seems that everything is coming out in these papers that I never buy. And so I'm buying a paper again, it's crazy, because this headline says that royal scum, I love that. I mean, is that inviting? Royal scum, 9/11 families outraged over Saudi Arabia's $750 billion blackmail. So everyone saw this threat that Saudi Arabia gave to our government to pull $750 billion from our economy as a blackmail threat. And even the Daily News has it on the cover. Now, that reminds me of a time when Obama himself actually signed on to a situation where families of victims of a bombing that took place in Lebanon, in Beirut, Lebanon, that killed 280 soldiers at that time, U.S. Marines, and the families of those soldiers sued because Hezbollah was responsible for the bombing, and Iran supported Hezbollah, funded them, and everything else. So these families sued Iran, which is a government, just like Saudi Arabia is a government. However, at that time, President Obama signed on in support of the families. Now he's saying that you can't sue a government. That's just not something that we can do. But when it was Iran, it was fine for those families to try to be compensated for their loss. And now we know exactly why this is true, that he's not supporting the families in the case of Saudi Arabia. So if you could comment on that. We have, of course, it deals with our president, but if you can comment on the fact that our president is running around supporting these traitorous operations.
Well, there's no I've got this early barking system. Okay, no early barking, please. No, the situation there is obvious. Obama is guilty. He's guilty of many things. He was born sort of in Saudi Arabia and formed in that area and summoned to existence by the British Queen and the British and her associates. So he is that of that nature, and I can add very significantly to that is that to everything that he has Obama and his crew have done, they have committed crimes and are now still committing crimes, which are great crimes against not only some nations of the world, but practically all of the nations of the world, led by the Queen.
Thank you. Okay.
Next.
So here I am, Johanna from Manhattan. This has been a very exciting week. And Jessica stole my question. So there's enough questions to come up with here. But I wonder, since you're so great at forecasting, what you think that could come out of as propaganda out of this meeting that Obama has done in Saudi Arabia and in England, commiserating with the Bushes. What do you think could come out of that, with the knowledge that they're being exposed?
Well, the obvious thing is that what the intention is on that party is to actually cause mass death throughout the whole planet. That's the intention. The argument by Obama was made in a qualified way to indicate that is what his intentions was. And you can get a hint of it by looking at his stepfather. His stepfather was a mad killer, and Obama's a mad killer. He kills people. He's killed many people in the United States as U.S. citizens.
So how could we make a focus on the declassification of the 28 pages if a distraction of massive debt? How can we make a connection with that? So
I don't have any problem in dealing with that needed correction.
no, I mean for to do a campaign on it.
No, we just have to go in there, and we have to go in there and realize that we are throwing the President of the United States into prison.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
What we're doing by our action is implicitly stating that the President of the current President of the United States is to be put into prison.
I'm okay with that. Thank you very much for that answer.
Hi, Lynn. Pim from Montreal.
Good.
I wanted to ask this last week, but I had a bit of trouble composing the question, so I hope it comes out right. But what I want to ask is something to do with the nature of the universe and how that relates to what we're doing. We know that the solar system is tuned kind of like a musical system to middle C 256, and this is also the proper tuning of the human singing voice. So that obviously says something between the relation of the mind and the universe as a whole. It doesn't work like Newton proposed, which is just a bunch of forces acting and repelling each other. There's something different about it. And my question is, we just over this, say, 6 weeks, 2 months period, organized both a concert and a conference. And there was a definite increase in our organizing capabilities during that time. And immediately after this, literally 2 days, you have a dramatic escalation for the fight to release the 28 pages. And this is really in an unprecedented way. It's just increased and increased over the last 2 weeks. So my question is, how much did our organizing these two events, how much did that actually cause or create this escalation at this particular moment?
Okay, what you can say is we had a conference in this context, the period of this context, and we raised a number of questions which were quite in conflict, and we presented it. We presented a case, which is the case, not taking into account immediately Obama, but we took into consideration everything that we went through during the course of that session, and it worked. As far as we can see, it worked.
All right, thanks.
Hi, Mr. LaRouche. This is Rick from Bergen County, New Jersey. I want to ask you a question about this issue of sovereign immunity. It seems that with the 28 pages becoming a major issue in the press and so forth, and a lot of discussion about issues related to that, there are other elements who are starting to crawl out from under the rocks. In particular, there was an op-ed yesterday in the New York Times by two law professors. The title of the op-ed is "Don't Let Americans Sue Saudi Arabia." the gist of their argument is that, gee whiz, I mean, if we allowed people to sue Saudi Arabia, then by the symmetric argument, that would modify international law, and it would make it okay for people who were victims of U.S. terrorism for them to sue the United States. And that, since they basically come out and say no nation benefits more from the arrangement of sovereign immunity in international law than the United States. It conducts far more diplomatic, economic, and military activities abroad than any other nation. Were the sovereign immunity rule to weaken the United States would be subject to many more lawsuits in foreign courts than any other nation. I found this pretty astonishing. That
it's also totally incompetent.
So, so they're talking about the immunity from prosecution. And I also noticed a news item today in the Wall Street Journal that as a result of U.S. bombings in going after ISIS, admittedly 41 civilians were killed. And what immunization, you raised in my mind the question of what kind of immunization from random death did these 41 people have? But anyway, my focus question to you is, what is your opinion? Do you think there's anything to be said for this international law argument of sovereign immunity?
No, there is none. Absolutely nothing. We have a standard by most nations, the major nations, leading nations, who are obliged to recognize the validity of any wrongdoing by any government or agency of government. They are subject to prosecution, and properly so.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. It's Patrick from Greenwich, Connecticut.
Yes.
Okay, this is a report on our distribution of the pamphlets. Me and my organization, we put over 400 leaflets out and about 30 pamphlets. And we went to all the police departments, all the town halls, libraries, and especially the fire departments. And instead of honoring, I said, now you can, and now it's payback. And they were all just, just delighted that they were able to do something now. So I'm continuing to do this at a high level, and Connecticut's going to be back on the map very shortly, okay? And I'm with you 100%. You have the 9th Regiment Connecticut Militia.
Well, that is charming news to be restated again. which you've stated before, previously. Now, the point is, you think about these things of institutions of government, like city government or national state governments. And these things are really quite important because you are the state systems and similar kinds of systems, special systems, are more efficient in bringing the issues of problems to face. In other words, like the people who have got professional firefighter people, they are quicker to get act on the job because that is their job, and therefore they can put their voice in there and get other parties of government into action more quickly. And also forewarning. The most important thing is the forewarning arm, which can be provided through the agency of like a Connecticut organization, state organization. And we want things that can be quickly dealt with, that need to be dealt with, and that is really a very special, important consideration. Then, and major parties, major aspects of different parties of the United States, they can also be affected efficiently by the appeal shared among the states of the United States.
Thank you very much.
Hi, it's Lissy. So Ray and I, we participated in a 2-day conference on the Puerto Rican debt crisis. And there was a discussion on getting a righteous restructuring bill in Congress. And besides, there was a general spirit of people who wanted independence from the U.S. and who referred to U.S. as colonists, or others who wanted equal rights as an American state. Now, we raised the question on Glass-Steagall and New Silk Road, which created tension. What is your stake on the Puerto Rican case?
Well, my case on Puerto Rican is the same thing as the Mexico. Now, what I was cooperated with a leading figure in Mexico. He made appeal to the general world on the basis of the real systems. And I could say that what is true of Mexico is true of many nations, in part at least, in terms of South America. And these things all exist as problems. And I would say that my friend, who I was close to when he was the president of Mexico and made an international presentation for the state of the system as a whole, and he was shut down by the international influence in Mexico. But it went to everybody. It went everything in that kind of way. And so therefore, what we have now a problem in Argentina, we have a problem in Brazil, and other locations. So throughout the entire area, the atrocities against Mexico right now, the personal destruction of the rights of the individual in Mexico. It's a fact. And therefore, something has to be done about that. Because here we had Mexico, and I was a backer of the founding of the Mexican presidency at that time. And the people in the United Nations took that away and put Mexico into a terrible condition up to the present time. And other parts of South America are subjected to the similar kind of thing. So I'm out to close down those kinds of practices and with some deal of insight into why these things are wrong and what has to be done about them. And I just waiting to get my paws on these offenders and clean the mess up if somebody will help me do it.
Thank you.
Next.
Hello, Mr. LaRouche. This is Howard from New York, and I'd like to talk about a seminar that I saw this week about drugs, but also related to terrorism. I got to hear a Mr. William Brownfield at an NYU seminar, and he's a State Department official, Foreign Service officer on international drug policy. And I questioned him on a few things. He says that he used to collaborate on drug policy with Viktor Ivanov, the Russian drug czar, until this was stopped when the Russians moved into Crimea, really the NATO expansion and the Russian counter operation. And also I brought up the huge death rate due to opiate pain relief drugs through the pharma business, probably including the recent death of the rock star known as Prince. But how can we be running a war policy against Russia and China, yet at the same time legalizing drugs and destroying our own people? And secondly, is this another angle on the meaning of the Saudi-British sponsorship of the 9/11 attacks?
Well, I wouldn't take the particular differentiation of issues on this one. The fact of the matter is, the British Empire controls most of this robbery and similar kinds of crimes throughout the planet. Therefore, they should be punished and shut down accordingly for reason of the actions which they have taken against mankind. Simple. We don't have to plead on because. You know, you have people who have legal arguments, and they come in with a big word, because. And the crows have still saying, caw, 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 caw. It's the same kind of thing. So I think the whole issue is a sick issue. It's not a significant issue. It doesn't have real characteristics and real teeth in a moral sense in place. And I think what we could have to do very easily, if the United States were to obey the law as Franklin Roosevelt's law did, and then I think we could solve a lot of these problems rather quickly. And I think we ought to do that. And don't waste your time on this trivial stuff.
Okay. Would you have anything to say about 9/11 and the Saudis and how this relates to sort of crimes against Americans?
I'm ready to cook them. Except I don't think the meat's any good.
Okay.
Next. Everyone should be prepared for the answer they're going to get.
Hi, Lynn. This is Daniel. And I want to, well, at the moment, we have reported that in the same speech today, reported today's papers or yesterday's, where Obama spoke about the special relationship of the United States and Britain when he was celebrating the Queen's 90th birthday. He in that same speech, he talks about how terrible Putin is and how much he hates Vladimir Putin. I mean, essentially, right? And in the same process, we have, just in the past couple of days, more public announcements about the so-called Plan B that was leaked to the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks or a week or so ago in Syria, which is providing anti-aircraft weaponry to Syrian moderate rebels, as they say, which is really a bunch of Saudi-controlled jihadis, which anti-aircraft weaponry could be used to bring down a Russian airplane, and certainly means World War III. So I wanted to ask you about this advancement in the war danger, and at the same time, I want to tell you that we're going to be making a full report on this very shortly. But there was a major event here in New York this week that represents a process over about a year of Russian Americans organizing to try to pull the U.S. and Russia back together. So there is kickback coming from Manhattan, which we're invited to participate in. We have been. But what is happening with this advancement in regarding Russia and the war danger?
Well, the war danger is tremendous. We're on the edge of general warfare. Now, the British system and its allies, which include also Obama, are the guilty party in this thing and has to be shut down. Now, look, for example, let's take the case of deaths incurred by Obama, President Obama, during his term of office. He has killed more people day by day than any other agent. He's a killer. He's a mad murderer. And he should have been thrown in prison, not just thrown out of law. As long as we tolerate that operation in the United States, we are actually condoning horror. We're violating everything of what law should be among nations. So there's no excuse for giving him any tolerance whatsoever. Okay, he was in the best of our information on every Tuesday of his service from a certain point to the present time. He has killed more innocent people under his legislation than any other source of murder. He's a killer. He's an enemy of civilization. And when I say enemy of civilization, I mean it. Because the application is general, it's global. Obama's presence in government is an action against the principle of life in the United States and beyond. This man belongs in jail, not in the president.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn. So I don't know if I have a question fully worked out, so I'm going to kind of make a statement, just see what you think about it. But it seems to me that the issue of 9/11, the Saudi role in it, the release of the 28 pages, this JASTA bill, the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorists, that's, well, on the one hand, it is a specific issue for the U.S. and U.S. law and justice for the victims of 9/11. On the other hand, it's part of the international, a question of international law. I mean, the Al Yamama deal, as you really have taken this up, that no one else has even had the guts to take on the implications of this Al Yamama deal, the weapons for oil deal, where created a massive slush fund that didn't just fund operations like 9/11, it funded all kinds of terrorist operations all over the planet. So in other words, there's more to it than just a U.S. justice issue. Now, what I was thinking about is the Nuremberg tribunals were important not just for an issue of justice for what had occurred, but it was also important for a sense of what the world was going to be coming out of the war, the post-war war world. That people like Franklin Roosevelt had a very specific idea, and it was going to be much more in line with this idea of sovereign nations that could collaborate. This was the United Nations, the intention of the United Nations, the intention of the World Bank and the IMF was supposed to be about development, but it was supposed to be a new concept, right? So it seemed important that the Nuremberg tribunals were important to establish what was going to be a new sense of the world coming out. So now here we are on the edge of another direction for nations amongst the world organized around the BRICS process, or the new paradigm more generally. It would seem to me that 9/11 and the issues around that and the international implications would be important to actually have a discussion amongst nations that what this represents must be brought to justice, not just for what occurred on 9/11, but to justice so that we can move forward with this new conception of relations between nations going forward from here. So that's my thinking on this. I want to see what you have to say.
The claims against the victims in the trials of this the Nazi system. This was a necessary action. Now, whether the execution as such was necessary is a debatable action. But the expediency made it clear that anybody who was allowed to run around with that kind of behavior in Germany or in France in particular. Remember, de Gaulle actually freed the French people from the British system, and so forth. That still exists there. That I still recognize that what the incumbency of the government of the French government presently is operating under a principle which is against the principles of which de Gaulle brought into power. And what they did is they operated to deprive the French members who were sympathetic to the cause of France as such. De Gaulle presents of France, and has been also a crime in Europe. There are other cases of that, cases of nations have actually been committed crime en masse, and this is one of the cases. And with most of the ruling forces in France today, who came into the Socialist Party, so-called, which was really the Nazi Party of that time, and that has been a problem. And and my friend Jacques Cheminot, who is now a contending figure in the policies of the France, has set forth an exhibit of exactly what the measures are that have to be pursued in order to get France back into something which was civilized, something that had not been maintained since de Gaulle left office. When they got de Gaulle out of France, everybody took the British Empire, the British interest, the British Empire ran the real government of France as a racket. Now, they weren't all racketeers, but the underlying characteristic of the approach to law was something which is very close to the Nazi-like kinds of things, which the British had done. Remember, the whole thing was done by the British. So the British Empire took what had been the Gaullist movement, shut that down and brought in a new thing called the Socialist Party. And the Socialist Party brought in something which is very much like what we call it, Hitler light.
Hi. Well, I saw an article, Friday's New York Times had the article about the 30-year record number of suicides, and they also had an article about on the Museum of Modern Art versus the Metropolitan Museum of Art, that the Museum of Modern Art is flush with money, and the Metropolitan Museum is having extreme financial difficulties, laying off staff, not able to build a new wing, etc. And I started thinking about this, and thinking about, well, could it really be that Americans prefer to go look at so-called art, which consists of, someone letting their dog run through a mud puddle onto a canvas, and then you put it on the wall, or worse, and as opposed to, the things that people see at the Met, including that very famous Leutze painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, which is so large and striking when you get there. And I thought, no, this can't be. People do not find, spitting on a canvas to be more inspiring or than great art or what is beautiful. And of course, the point is, why is this Museum of Modern Art doing so well? It's because it's funded by Wall Street. And it's actually not what most people would find beautiful, just as when we're doing the solfege class here, everybody, there's certain universal principles where you recognize things that are ugly and things that are beautiful. But it just got me to thinking of the incredible role of Wall Street, of London and Wall Street, and in dictating to Americans. And I know we've written about this, but it really hit me in a different way today, that there is a dictatorship over what people even think is their culture. Like what in an article by Don Fowle on rock music, where he describes how the Beatles were organized. They literally paid a bunch of high school girls to go out to the airport and start screaming, and then filmed it and said that this was the popularity of the Beatles. So I'm just wondering if you have anything to say about this, because clearly this is an absolutely major factor in the incapacity of Americans to act when it's required.
Yeah, I have a lot of this on that issue, as you probably know. Probably more than you know, actually. But no, the point here is, the fact is that what we do, we make a farce out of art. What we do, the first thing to do is to put the art system under the control of certain kinds of gentlemen or non-gentlemen. And that is a common practice. It dominates things. And the whole thing is really, well, I just had some discussion earlier this morning on the same kind of area, that what we are faced with is trash. And we're faced with trash because other people think we ought to accept that trash, whether it's under one term or another. It's extremely important that we get a clear insight into what are the powers and practices of the human species within its own bounds to deal with these issues. And what we can do, essentially, is we can recognize these issues and propose to support them. Well, I had, this morning, in our meeting we had this morning, this issue came up, and I presented my view on this issue. That this has to be cut out. This corruption has to be cut out. And we have to understand that there are principles which we sometimes call principles of art, and there corresponds to the functions of art in the life of mankind in general. And these things are crucial.
Thanks.
Lynn, in this case, I'd like to do a follow-up question to that, because I think you're going to have something that nobody else is going to even think to say about this. Yesterday was the 100th birthday of Yehudi Menuhin.
Yes.
And I've been reading his autobiography, and he talks about his defense of Furtwängler and what happened to him and what was done in opposition. And you'll see immediately why I'm bringing this up. He says this, he says, in the summer of 1947, when the odium of my having played with Furtwängler was still freshly upon me, I drove to Prague at the eastern limits of the Pyrenees to see Pablo Casals and to request his aid and comfort for Wilhelm Furtwängler. Okay. Casals was in his 71st year and was revered for his refusal to capitulate to Franco by exiles and patriots from every region of Spain. I asked Casals his opinion of Furtwängler. He said he admired Furtwängler not only as a conductor, but as a German. He had been right to stay in Germany and to do what he could for music and musicians. Reassured, I suggested that I might try to arrange a recording of the Brahms double concerto to be made by Casals, Furtwängler, myself, so on. Then here's what happened, Glenn. He says it got arranged, and then the recording was never made, and so he asked Casals why, and he said, Casals wrote me a note. He said he personally had nothing against Furtwängler and could envision few greater pleasures than playing with him, were it not for the fact that to do so might compromise his anti-fascist stance and dismay his followers. In other words, Casals was prepared to let me know he didn't have the courage of his convictions. So long as those convictions were approved by his admirers, they were strong, indeed, but in other circumstances, not strong enough to withstand guilt by association with the man he knew had been wrongfully convicted. And then here's what Menuhin says he thought happened. I think Casals became, in a way, the prisoner of a coterie of my New York colleagues, who more or less ran the first few musical festivals at Prague. They made wonderful music with Casals, but they also used his prestige for their own purposes, including punishment campaigns against suspect musicians, who, because of my championing of Furtwängler, came to focus on Furtwängler and on me. Now, here's why I'm asking you about this, Lynn. You were there. You know what this whole idea of the FBI, harassment, the way in which people change their convictions, they know what the truth is, they won't stand up for it. And you've been talking about that for the last several weeks and even months, actually, with those of us in our organization, and about this moment. But I thought, given what you've continually said about Furtwängler, and continually said about his role, that this observation from Menuhin, whether it's correct, not, I just wanted to bring this to your attention in the context of what you were saying about art and see if you had anything to say.
I would say one thing that's relevant on this whole broad issue as considered. First of all, what Furtwängler did in his contributions, especially in what he did in works that he presented in the post-World War II period. And there was, his work was unique, totally unique. There was no musician who had a grasp that he did. He did, and no one did. And this is seen very clearly when you look at what happens with Schubert and so forth on this same issue. But his achievements are beyond recognition. Most musicians are not capable of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
They try to fit something into do it, but they don't understand it. They don't understand it because they think it's the same thing that came up with Italy. In the same thing in music. But in Italy was much more favored than was Germany, of course, and therefore but the principle is the same. If you look at Verdi and look at Verdi's work, you'll find out there's a very characteristic kind of composition which his use of language requires. Then you have with Furtwängler, you have another great genius whose mastery of composition of musical composition, is unmatched on the record. And today, people can still take work from performance models from Furtwängler, and they will show you something by experience which you will never get from any alternate sources. And Furtwängler was the last surviving real genius in the history of musical composition, classical musical composition. The others got damaged in one way or the other.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. This is Rod. I was talking to you on Thursday night at the fireside chat, and I was asking a question on Thursday night. I asked you about Bernard, I keep getting his name wrong, Russell's, and his tactics, his writings from the 30s and 40s, which I'd like you to discuss today, is the methods by which we can defeat Bernard Russell's tactics to destroy humanity. Because essentially these are the tactics that's being used today with the warfare all over the world, etc., the dumbing down of our education, and all of these other things that Russell has been a proponent of. This is what the Crown is doing today. What methods, besides the obvious which we've been discussing, like getting rid of Obama, number one, and other tactics, what else can we do? Or would you suggest there's more that we can do than we're doing?
On the question, the preceding question, which I have responded to, and what I'm responding to you right now, is that in the case of classical musical composition, which were the subjects of the two subjects we presented just before, the question of how that is to be judged has to be judged really by experts. Now, the best way to do that is a practical one. We are now in Manhattan with our concentration on Manhattan, which is we're strong on, and we'll hopefully do something similarly in California musical areas, and also in the space program, the one that was shut down by Obama. And so these kinds of compositions, like the great musical composition and so forth, all have a peculiarity that they cannot be deductively derived. In other words, there is no deductive method to understand the principles of musical composition or any similar kind of subject matter. That's the point. And what we do in order to deal with that, we will take this area right here, these premises right here, which I have before me. And these people who are in those conditions, in those locations, have to perfect themselves in order to understand the greatest artistic composition which we can experience in performances. We could get music in performances. We have people who we assemble, as other people have assembled and been trained to do this, to present a musical composition which fits exactly what the intention is, which fits something akin to what Furtwängler did. Furtwängler was much more polished, but the influence of Furtwängler in this whole thing was very important. So the point is, what we have to do is we have to have a understanding of what we mean by artistic composition. And I have a very special meaning for that, because I think there are certain areas which I would consider composition, and other areas I would not consider serious composition. But the point is, all good composition, thorough composition, is very important for all mankind. And having it right is also very important. Because this, when you do it properly, you accede to a realm which is beyond all customary behavior. We call it music. And that's, so therefore, what we call music and what we defend as being music is something we practice or try to practice with some degree of accuracy in all classical musical composition and related matters.
So, would I be correct in saying we're using our creativity to counter Russell's lack of creativity in his writings?
This guy's rotten. This guy's evil. He's satanic.
Yeah.
He's intrinsically satanic. Just take what his attack on Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell, the greatest scientific genius who ever walked the surface of Earth. Einstein. Yeah. And so this is not an issue which requires much consideration by me. This is something I know very well, and this is what we need.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, next.
Hi, Lynn. This is Art, stepping out of the AV team for a second.
Okay.
I wanted to bring up a suggestion I had, which I hope can lead to some discussion. Today being the anniversary of the passing of William Shakespeare. He possibly was born around the same time because he was baptized on the 26th of April, I understand.
Yeah.
But anyway, what I wanted to suggest was this. Everybody, I'm sure, has seen these press photos of these obscene grins by Obama standing next to his queen, recently. And I thought an appropriate caption for these pictures would be this quotation: "Here's the smell of the blood, still. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand." We can show you the picture here.
Uh,
Camera there. Can you see that?
oh, here it is. Got it up there. Oh, that's terrible. The smell is terrible.
Anyway, it seems that Americans lack the gall to make oppression bitter, as it's been said. I would ask if you could make some more comments. You've said a lot about the importance of Shakespeare today.
Well, the whole branch of art, real art, creative art, and science are one of the same thing. Because, just take the question of Furtwängler, that what he produced was something which was scientifically precise. There's no possibility of a successful representation of a composition designed by Furtwängler which would fit any common, ordinary musician. Even the greatest musicians, otherwise, most of them, would say, no, I'm not going to go into that, because they know they're not capable of doing what he was capable of doing and did repeatedly. And so there are resemblances in that sense, in terms of artistic work, which do point toward the divine. We call it the divine spirit of art, the divine spirit of science. And these things which we can attribute to divine spirits of some kind or another, these have a certain sacredcy about them. And therefore we give them special pressure. And the rewards are great. When somebody assimilates these kinds of principles in their practice, the person who receives the information is blessed forever.
Thank you.
Hi there, Lynn. I'm just going to follow up on more of the Shakespeare question. That he understood the Italian principle. I mean, most of his plays were from Italian plays. The literature that he got from most of the literature itself they didn't get in England. They didn't get the sculpture and the painting from the Italian Renaissance till way later. They got the literature from Italy, and so I would just pose the question right now, like, it is a real thing that we have to figure out how to develop this Italian principle. And I was actually at this play that was a couple weeks ago, where these former military veterans who now are professional actors. They were doing a rendition of Sophocles. One of these plays that he had. Anyway, there was mostly commentary just on PTSD, and what I raise is that you can't just these plays themselves are not commentary. These were plays written by geniuses to actually purge the population of tragedy, and not just commentary. And really, what I'm asking is how do we actually develop that conception today?
Well, I went through that in the course of my earlier incarnation in life, where I spent a lot of time on the question of that. So that is not a problem for me. It never was. The problem for me is that very few people who talk about Shakespeare know much of anything about Shakespeare's work, because his work is based on a systemic conception of irony. of durable irony. Turn the battlefields into something which can be understood. Show how the battlefield comes into action in relationship with issues of mankind. And this becomes a lesson process where people are educated by going through the Shakespeare experiences when they are properly understood. And you get something which is absolutely unique to the present day. And Shakespeare is unique. It belongs with Leibniz and people like that. Leibniz was a different kind of case. He was a different kind of case. But they had a great similitude in terms of their mission or orientation.
All right, thank you.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Thank you. Hi, Lynn. Hi, this is Maggie. I want to ask your opinion about something. What do you think of the situation? Because I was struck just a few days ago. I was really amazed at what I heard. I went, like I assume most Upper West Side Manhattanites, to my polling place and walked in. There were not very many people there. I was sort of shocked. Democratic primary. And actually, I had a very nice time talking to the gal, and it was very relaxed because there weren't that many people there. It was about 5:30. I assumed it would be more crowded. Well, I went home fine, and then I hear on the news, and I read in the newspapers, that things went awry in New York in the primary, the Democratic primary, and that in Brooklyn, of all places, 125,000 people were turned away from the polls. 125,000 people who assumed they were going to win, they were registered. Somehow or other, their names all just disappeared. And within 24 hours, our comptroller, Scott Stringer, who is with the Working People's Party, I do believe, actually, he was furious. He blamed it on incompetency. And I said to myself, I wonder about that, because we had some strange elections in the past, the elections for the presidency. It was brought to my attention in 2001 November between Gore and Bush. And of course, Bush became the president. It had to do something with the debate that suddenly, as Bush was falling apart, the MC of the debate, turned it around and changed the conversation and talked about his daughters or some carry-on like that. And I got thinking, I thought, here is Brooklyn. Number one, it is the home of many, many African Americans. Okay. Bed-Stuy, Bushwick, and the like. And secondly, it is now become the home of youth, people coming from all over the country, young people, and they seem to be settling in Brooklyn.
Maggie, do you have a question?
My question is, what is your opinion of this? Is this some innocent non-competence on the part, as Scott Stringer said, or is there something more diabolical about the whole thing, that we should worry about having a democracy that's being really interfered with, even in these primary levels?
No, the point is very simple. This is total incompetence. It's intrinsic incompetence. All of these kinds of things you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Intrinsic incompetence and fraud mixed together.
And fraud.
And that's what it is. And therefore, when you come into that, you say, well, fraud again. And that is, it's a kind of alternative term for fried.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, fraud again. There you go.
Follow up, and then you. Yeah, go ahead, Rick. Quick.
Hi, Mr. LaRouche. This is Rick from Bergen County, New Jersey. I picked up an editorial by the economist Paul Krugman, also in the New York Times, called "In Hamilton's Debt," where he basically outlines the Hamilton's path-breaking policy manifestos and his first report on the public credit. And he just outlines the general idea of Hamiltonian economics. And he specifically says that Hamilton wanted the federal government to take on the state debts to establish a national reputation as a reliable borrower so that funds could be raised cheaply in the future, and also to give wealthy, influential investors a stake in the new federal government, thereby creating a powerful pro-federal constituency. He also seems to approve of the Hamiltonian policy by saying that bonds issued by the U.S. government would provide a safe, easily traded asset that the private sector could use as a store of value, as collateral for deals, and in general as a lubricant for business activity. And then refers to it as a national blessing, which I believe was Hamilton's phrase. He then...
Excuse me, Rick, are you saying...
Okay. If governments were to issue more debt and invest in infrastructure, it would provide the private sector with the collateral it needs to function. So he's pointing out the growth aspect of the Hamiltonian. And it seems that people who oppose this policy, he also points out the negatives of the people who are opposing debt on the basis of the idea that all conceivable forms of debt from the government are wrong. And so my question is it that the people who oppose any type of debt, who oppose any form of government debt, is it that they aren't aware of the Hamiltonian formation, or that they are aware of it and just simply are enemies of it?
Well, I think that most people today in the United States, especially in the economic characteristics, that he was unique. He created the system, a financial system, which the United States received. He did it on his own terms. And these terms that he laid out was laid out in 4 particular specific laws. The 4 laws of Alexander Hamilton. These are the laws to this day, which are the foundation, the valid foundation of all work of him and of his ideas of that nature. There is no such thing as an interpretation law. You have an explicit layout of 4 specific laws crafted by Alexander Hamilton. And if somebody were to try to strip that away and get Hamilton out of there as an image, then it would be a good time to have a little riot and say, this is disgusting, this is stupid, this is disgusting, this is degenerate. And it's all those terms. But you just look it up. There are any of the books which are published by him, and you can pick out exactly the exact language and also the exact argument of what he did. And anybody who thinks that they can duck him, they should be sent to another place rather than economics.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Diane again. I have a follow-up on this question of culture, and some of what I'm looking at with this whole choral principle in the 1800s. There was a fellow named Theodore Thomas who was a violinist who came from Germany, who was part of this group of people organizing these big concerts and also small concerts. He organized a chamber ensemble of a string quartet and a pianist who did hundreds of concerts all over the United States. But there's a description about his breakthrough in a book called Song of the Lark, by Willa Cather, where she describes that in New York City in 1951, he heard Jenny Lind and Henrietta Sontag. And then the book says, night after night he went to hear them, striving to reproduce the quality of their tone upon his violin. From that time, his idea about strings was completely changed, and on his violin he tried always for the singing, vibrating tone instead of the loud and somewhat harsh tone then prevalent among even the best German violinists. In later years, he often advised violinists to study singing and singers to study violin. But of course, he added, the great thing I got from Lind and Sontag was the indefinite, not the definite thing. For an impressionable boy, their inspiration was incalculable. They gave me my first feeling for the Italian style, but I could never say how much they gave me. At that age, such influences are actually creative. I always think of my artistic consciousness as beginning then. That made me think of several things, which is the conscious emphasis you've made upon Italian bel canto, that this was conscious. It was a conscious policy direction of musicians in the United States in this period. Also, what you were saying earlier today about the question of children and the education of children and the impact of hearing a great artist on a young boy, which completely transformed his life and what he did. Theodore Thomas was the conductor of the chorus of 1000 at the Centennial Exposition that performed the Hallelujah Chorus. And I think that is very important because there are many among us who I think still don't exactly appreciate the musical principle is part of the fight for the new Silk Road. It is part of the fight for what we are organizing. When they did the Hallelujah Chorus at the Centennial Exposition, this was not for entertainment. This was part of what the United States was proud of that it was producing. So I just wanted to bring this to your attention and ask if you had further comments.
I could just say that there were a number of people who were involved in this kind of program of presenting musical compositions and their performances. And what happened is a friend of mine also had a father who was a leading figure in that formation of that particular session. And he has reminded me many times about what his father had done. And I think that anyone who digs out that recording, which is available among some people, I don't have a copy myself at hand, but I did have it. It was on point, and it's a very wonderful thing. This is something which inspired me many times because I had to go listen to some of this work. But that's great. We have a natural of my generation, the people of my generation, a natural access to great musical composition and its work in those cases. So I would suggest that some of my friends who have access to those particular series should probably contribute a copying of this so that others can share it.
You're referring to a certain Jolanowski.
Yes.
Good.
So then I think that's our questions for today. This week we're going to be having all sorts of events here, interventions and all sorts of things. Some of our Irish friends are commemorating the 100th anniversary of the Easter Rising. There are events around the 9/11 business. There are many different things happening. So the Manhattan Project is going to be very active this week. And in particular, now that we've got Saudi Arabia, the British, and Obama all sort of lined up right there in front of us, I'd just like to ask you if you have any words for us for how we should conduct ourselves in the next several days.
Well, I think we should avoid frying people. That might, that would be unpleasant. But I think anything which is creative, actually creative, should be welcomed. But it should be of that nature.
Okay. No, not even any broiling, right? You don't want to see any.
No broiling, nothing of that sort.
Any of those things.
What you want is
Saute.
musicians and other people who have something to contribute to the melee.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you want.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll see you next week.